Fall camp is about to heat up, and there are guys we need to watch for.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Jumped on with Ben Taylor of Auburn Opelika this morning to talk about the next step of fall camp, as well as other things happening with the Auburn football program.
You know, I'm kind of wondering where we're headed as far as fall camp is concerned. And the reason being is because a lot of shorts and helmets, a lot of shells, and now we're going to see some scrimmaging maybe over the weekend. And then there's maybe going to be some popping going on here pretty soon. So I'm kind of wondering who's going to step up, who's going to step out. Will we see anything different? Will there be any changes? So yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. And meaning, you know, will it look a whole lot different next week than it does this week, Zach?
I think so. And I certainly think we'll kind of get a glimpse of that on what the media availability looks like for next week. The fact that so many folks are going to be there on Saturday, I'm kind of wondering how much information we're actually going to be able to get, because if it was really that important of a practice, they wouldn't have as many people showing up. So I'm a little skeptical exactly of how much information we could get, but there are certainly some guys that you're starting to hear more and more folks. And I'm asking consistently, like, who are guys that are flying under the radar that I need to be talking about a little bit more? And, you know, Amon Lane Gaines is a guy whose name continues to pop up, and, you know, true freshman defensive back. We're not expecting to see a whole lot of him this year, but folks that I talk to about him say, yeah, he gets noticeably better each and every practice, which is what you want, especially from some of your younger players. So that's certainly a guy that I'm kind of keeping an ear out for and keeping an eye out on. But another guy is Isaiah Rakes. Jason Jones, it sounds like he's taken that step as that interior defensive lineman. But they brought in Isaiah Rakes for a reason. He's played for DJ Durkin before when he was at Texas A&M last season. So remember, Rakes transferred from A&M to USC, had a cup of coffee there, went through spring, and then transferred to Auburn to follow Durkin. So we'll certainly see what that looks like. It does sound like both of them are going to be on the field at the same time at points if they want to go heavy. So both of them can play nose, both of them can play 3 technique, and they've both done both of those things, according to some of the folks that I've talked to. So that's encouraging. Versatility is a big, big deal. And then Philip Bleedy is a guy that I think is going to end up starting at that 3 technique spot. They brought him over from Indiana, and it sounds like he has really hit the ground running as well. So a lot of names, a lot of guys that you kind of keep hearing the same names over and over again. Those are a few of them.
There's always one guy, you know, go back to the national championship year. It was Nick Fairley, who had terrible practices. But then all of a sudden, when the lights came on Saturday, or when Saturday rolled around, if it were a day game, there were no lights. But you get my point here. But when the lights came on, all of a sudden, he was a different player. He was a beast. I mean, nobody could block him, even though he looked big and slow in practice. He did not play big and slow come Saturday.
Sure.
Will we see anybody like that for Auburn that is kind of a gamer, somebody that's going to show up on Saturdays and you go, holy moly, who is that dude?
You certainly hope so, because I think there's a few position groups where it's like, I think Auburn's fine here, but to be great, to win 9 games this year, you need somebody in this room to step up, because it sounds like that guy a year ago was Marcus Harris, where nobody really expected him to do what he did last year when talking to those folks, because he doesn't do that in practice. But like you said, when the lights come on, I mean, he had an exceptional season. At times, he was Auburn's best player on the roster at times last year, based off of the way that he played in the games and the reps that matter. So who could that be? If you're Auburn, you hope it's Keldrick Falk. Like, you hope it's the strong side defensive end who may play some edge as well, depending on how DJ Durkin lines him up. You hope it's a guy like him or Jalen McLeod taking that next step. And maybe you saw Jalen McLeod do that a little bit towards the end of last season, the pass rusher for the Tigers. Could Kieran Crawford, the other pass rusher that you brought over from Arkansas State, could he be that guy? We'll see. But one of these guys on the defensive front needs to step up and needs to be that guy that when the lights turn on, they take that step forward.
Offensively, I don't think there's going to be hidden secrets because we've talked about, as far as changes are concerned. I mean, you got a big room to pick from as far as the wide receiver room is concerned. Sounds like some of those guys are coming along that are freshmen that maybe not necessarily were there in the spring. I think the offensive line, as you have pointed out numerous times, is pretty much set. I think we know who the quarterback is at this point, which is a little different than what we were doing this time last year, where people were, heck,
depends on who you asked.
Yeah, exactly. And so it sounds like that's a little more solidified. However, I'll ask you the same question about the offensive side of the football. Will there be anybody that kind of shows up again when the lights come on?
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible not to talk about the upside of the offense without talking about Cam Coleman. I spoke to somebody on the phone last night, Ben, just saying, hey, give me kind of an update on how fall camp is going. And we talked about the defense, and then we talked about the offense. And I'm like, I mean, just your thoughts on Cam Coleman. And everybody who talks about this dude, they just talk about how different he is. It's like he's doing stuff that you're not supposed to do. And also another common theme that when I think it was Champ Anthony, the nickel, who talked about it earlier in the week when he was asked about covering Cam Coleman, he says they're not 50-50 balls when Cam Coleman's up there. I think he said 70-30. The guy I talked to on the phone earlier this week said 90-10 in favor of Cam Coleman. It's just a dynamic piece of the offense that you have to get involved if you're a coordinator. And so Derek Nix and Hugh Freeze, they're going to make sure that Cam Coleman's a part of it. But we've talked about Cam Coleman a ton. Who's that next guy? And I think it's Robert Lewis. And we've kind of forgotten about him because he transferred so long ago. I mean, as soon as he entered the portal from Georgia State, he was linked to Auburn because he took a quick visit and then he committed. It was a pretty boring process of getting him, but he's been electric every step of the way. He led Auburn in receptions during A-Day, and everybody was focused on Cam Coleman because of those 2 or 3 catches that he had that were incredible. They were incredible, and he's certainly worthy of the praise. But I think Robert Lewis is flying under the radar here because even like the addition of Sam Jackson, just because there's more intrigue because he used to play quarterback and he's roommates with Thorne and they're buddies, talking about him at that slot position. But Robert Lewis, you just never know what he's going to be able to do off the line because he's so crafty and he's a skilled route runner because he's been playing college football for a long time. So he should be at this point. But Robert Lewis, to me, is flying under the radar, I think, so far throughout the entire offseason and specifically fall camp.
I do want to talk to you a little bit about defensive backs and even go back to wide receivers here momentarily. If that's
okay. And I think that's going to be huge, as well as, what's the biggest battle for a potential starter? I think all that is important. So we'll talk about that in just a moment right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at Game Time. Ben, can you imagine? Can you imagine buying tickets anywhere other than our friends at Game Time?
No.
If you bought them anywhere else, they're going to cost more.
Oh,
it's going to be more of a pain to get them. And you may not know the view from your seat, but you don't want that. You want to know exactly what you're buying. And you also want to know exactly how much you're going to be spending. How many times have we tried to buy a $20 ticket and you get a checkout, it's $80. Game Time. Yes. It's all baked in, and I think that's super honest and super cool of them. So head over to the free Game Time app in your app store, or the Google Play Store, depending on what kind of phone you have, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Ben, when you look at the position battles that are still open for Auburn, which is kind of interesting because there's normally a few guys battling for spots. And it seems like there's 2 spots that are kind of up for grabs right now. And one is the nose guard spot, Jason Jones versus Isaiah Rakes. And then the other one, you mentioned defensive backs just a second ago, Caleb Wooden versus Sylvester Smith. Depending on which viewing window you go out there to see these guys, you're seeing different dudes play at the one. That safety spot next to Jaron Thompson, the transfer from Texas. I think it's Sylvester Smith. I think he brings a lot more upside. I think he's a future NFL player. I think the NFL is going to like how he plays the position. So right now, my prediction is Sylvester Smith, but it sounds like Wooden's having a good camp so far.
I told you the video that got shared online from earlier practice. Of course, it was, or even your own Charlie 5 was involved in that as well with a conversation with somebody over social media.
Got it.
But it was J.C. Hart breaking up Perry Thompson pass. And Thompson had it, comes down in the corner of the end zone on the way down. Hart's able to strip it from him. I think the thing that I took away from that was not what the former Alabama beat writer took away, which was Perry Thompson dropped the ball. It also wasn't so much that J.C. Hart made a good play on pulling the ball away from him. What I came away from it is, as I've stood next to Perry Thompson, I've seen how big he is, and J.C. Hart looked the part right next to him as they were going back to their respective positions once the play was done. Yeah, I guess what I'm asking, Zach, because you've seen more practice than I have for sure, because I'm usually working when those morning practices are going on, so I haven't made it over there. And we send Jacob, but he's not telling me either. Are we bigger than I thought that we possibly would be? Because some of these guys, I've seen other guys, the highly touted guys, I've stood next to them. I've seen them. I've seen how big they are. And the guys that I haven't stood next to, I'm seeing them stand next to them, and I'm going, oh, they're bigger than I thought they were.
Yeah, across the board, yes. And obviously the receivers are getting a lot of talk because how big Cam and Perry are. I've talked about the offensive line. I mean, from an eye test standpoint, it's like, yes. that is what you want your offensive line to look like in the SEC. Defensive line, especially on the edges, I think they're larger, and then they've got some interior guys that have played a lot of college football coming in as well. But yeah, I think even that's the case with the defensive backs. I mean, this is a larger team than it was a year ago. Some of that is developing what you already had and getting those guys to put on a little bit of good weight. And other is just these guys are getting higher ranked players, and higher ranked players are normally bigger than the guys that are under them. There's a reason why, consistently good, teams have 4 and 5 star guys, because they just have some of the stuff that you can't teach. Hugh Freeze and the staff are adding guys like that. Now, is J.C. Hart known for his size? I don't think so, but he's not a small player by any stretch of the imagination. Right. But
no, I told you from video, just from what I'd seen from him before, I'm thinking
6'2", 199 is what Auburn has as a corner. That's not bad.
And that's the thing, is I was thinking, I did not look at his measurables, but I was thinking I thought going into it 5'10", 5'9", maybe 5'11", just under 6 feet. Put on cleats and a helmet, tap out at that 6 foot mark. But if he's 6'2", I mean, there's a reason he looked to be just as tall as Perry Thompson out there.
Yeah, and he's got long arms too. And so when you stretch those things out like he did to hit the ball, I mean, he can swipe it from wherever. So yeah, I like J.C. Hart. Do I expect him to play a lot this year? Probably not. Right. But I do think the fact of the matter is, if J.C. Hart has moments like that and looks the part, and he's your 8th corner, 6th, 7th, 8th corner.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if he's on down the line, that'll tell you something.
It's a good spot to be in. Yep.
Before we talk expectations, I'm going to throw a grenade in your lap here a little bit. Have y'all been around long enough to see any sort of return game? Who we'll see back there? I mean, I'm sure kickoffs. We saw Jacquez back there along with maybe a couple other guys. So I don't know if that's the same thing that we see again. I just didn't know with some of these newcomers coming in, if maybe somebody had some faster wheels, that they may try somebody else back there.
Yeah, they were doing punts during the viewing window a few days ago, or at some point earlier this week, and Perry was back there, which is interesting. But I would imagine, unless he just doesn't want to do it, that Keontae Scott would be a candidate for that in the punt return game. And then Jarquez in the kick return game. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine them switching up stuff a ton there. So this is my gut reaction.
Speaking of which, I mean, we see it right here on the screen. The expectations thing, has that changed at all in your mind that you've seen? Because it seems like these practices, according to the coaching staff, are a little more solid now. If we're comparing practices last year to practices this year, of course they look more solid. But it seems to be meeting coaches' expectations of sharpness and being able to make sure everything's done correctly and done smoothly. And there's not a lot of yelling, not a lot of putting people in places because they're kind of lost out there. Nobody seems that way.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of really simple statements we can make where I think we'll all universally agree that make it really hard not to get excited. So here's a few of these. Do we expect Peyton Thorne to be better than a year ago?
Yes.
Not great, but better than a year ago. Yes. Is Auburn's roster better now or a year ago?
No, definitely now. Most definitely.
Yeah. Do the players understand the scheme at a higher level now versus a year ago?
If they don't, that's a big issue. So, yes, I would expect that.
Yeah. And then, I mean, we can kind of nitpick and talk about, specific playmaking guys like Cam Coleman and Robert Lewis and some of those guys, but we won't go down that rabbit hole. But the other one is, okay, well, is Auburn's schedule easier this year than it has been in a long time? I think so.
I say yes.
I think so.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you put all those together and Auburn went, they only won 6 games a year ago, but they took Ole Miss, Georgia, and Alabama to the wire. Why can't Auburn overachieve this season? And like, it's really hard to like think about all that and be like, dang, yeah, Auburn does have an easier path to 9 wins, but they've got to go out and do it. And there's a lot of expectations that we're making with those statements, but man, it's hard for expectations not to have gone up a few notches after how fall camp has started. And also, I think something that Auburn needs to do as a fan base is separate what's happening on the field from what's happening off of the field, because all of this energy that's happening in recruiting, I've already seen people comment like, oh my gosh, with all this buzz, we got to win 9 games. It's like, well, what's happening at Big Cat Weekend doesn't impact this season at all. It might impact ticket sales or overall giving and things like that. But as far as your roster, like, that's been set. That's been set for the last few months, with the exception of them adding Gote at linebacker a few weeks ago. So to me, when it comes to expectations, I think we just got to be careful as a fan base to kind of compartmentalize some of these wins where it impacts the future and not this current roster.
Very well said. I said the same thing because a buddy of mine back home was asking me, he said, what's the excitement level? I said, well, wait a second. Just because they get a 2026 commit, that doesn't turn into a win for 2024. That's not how that works. And so I said, you need to temper that just a little bit. And he said, well, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. And I was like, same thing with the guys that are committing for 2025. They're just committed. They're not going to see the field this year. Some are committed, may not see the field next year. I mean, they may get redshirted. They may not develop.
It's a long-term investment for sure. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these guys you're not going to see till 2027, 2028, but it's building a foundation and the future. And that's how you build a college football program. That's what Alabama did. That's what Kirby Smart did with Georgia. I mean, it's what Michigan did with Harbaugh. I mean, they were close for a long time, but it took them 8 seasons to get to that point, to, where they were a national champion. So this stuff takes time if you do it the right way, but the track record's there, and Hugh Freeze is following that playbook.
How about that guy? He bolts and leaves them with a bag up there in Michigan, huh?
Yeah, another example of the NCAA just being toothless and say, we're going to punish the guy that that's not even around anymore.
It's not even the guy. It's the kids, man. It makes me so mad because none of those guys had anything to do with that.
Nope.
And they're going to be the ones that suffer for it. So kids and fans, the players and fans. So, Zach, how do they find you, man?
Yeah. Locked On Auburn, available wherever you get your podcasts. And also check out our new stuff at thebarnauburn.com. That is Auburn's newest message board. So be sure to check that out. Ben, how can people check out everything you've got going on?
We've got Braves Today that you can do. That's the podcast that we will jump on every now and then, and we will talk not very good about the Braves at this point because they seem to be in a big rut as far as the bats are concerned, and every pitcher they've got seems to be going down with some sort of arm soreness or something. So we will see if they even make the playoffs, because right now they're even finding themselves out of the wild card slot.
That's insane to think about. Please like the video. Please subscribe. We'll see you next time. This has been Locked On Auburn.